Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Jim Rooney. He's going to share some stories about his friendship with John Prine.
It was the summer of 75 or 6, I don't know which, but we were playing festivals. And there was a guy named Jim Clark who had really interesting festivals, a mixture of folk rock, bluegrass. You know, he had John Hartford, the Dillards, had, the Earl Scruggs Review, really interesting festivals. But he always was coming up short money-wise. And he was a nice guy. Everybody liked him. And everybody liked the festival, liked the combination of you, because you were hanging out with all these people. And but sooner or later, you got to get paid. So I was kind of chasing, and he would have another festival next week. He said, I'll take you, get you next week. And so you were chasing your money. If you didn't go to that next festival, you were never going to get paid. He knew that. So anyway, so I'm up there, and that particular, it was in Maine, and the headliners were Seals and Croft, and John Prine and Steve Goodman were on that program, as was John Hartford. And I didn't know John. I'd never met him. And they had a performer's tent, and I guess they had beer in there. And I was in there, and he came in there, and we just sat down and started talking. And I have no idea what we were talking about. But he told me later that he went back to his, after we spent an hour or so, or more or less, and he went back to his band and said to whoever was with him, he says, I think I just had a beer with Huck Finn. Which I took as a great compliment. Yeah, John told me this quite a bit later. And then I never saw him again. And then in 78, I'd been at Cowboys now for a couple of years, but in early 78, Eric von Schmidt and I got a deal to write this book about the Cambridge folk scene. And so I was out of Nashville pretty much for 6 months working on that book. It was quite an intense experience. And so I come back in August of 78, and Prine is there. And he and Cowboy had been working for some time on an album, and the tapes were piled up. And it was, as I mentioned, this Cowboy was having trouble finishing things. And John had a career. And, as much as he loved Cowboy, and I believe his manager, Al Bonetta, was very aware that John had a career and needed to finish this record and get going here. And this album never came out, the Cowboy part of it. They shifted to Steve Goodman, and that was the Bruised Orange album that Steve did. But John just fell in love with Nashville, and the fact that Rachel Peer was the bass player in Cowboys band by this point didn't hurt, and one thing led to another, and he wound up just moving down from Chicago. Probably by 79, 80, I was starting to engineer for Cowboy, and John did have a career. He was touring a lot. He wasn't around a lot. But he had committed to being in Nashville, and he rented a place, and he and Rachel got together, and so when he had some downtime, he would be around. This Irish guitar player Lee Clayton brought Philip Donnelly to town, and also this English drummer Tony Newman showed up. And I don't know what brought Tony to town, but he had played with David Bowie and Jeff Beck and Mark Bolan. And actually when I was a stage managing the Newport jazz festival in 1969. We had a lot of rock acts on that, and Jeff Beck was on there, and Tony was the drummer. But he had a Louis XIV hairdo, and when I met him in the kitchen at Cowboys. I came in after being away for 6 months. I walk in the kitchen. There's this English guy in the kitchen with curly hair. Turns out to be Tony Newman, world-class drummer. And Rachel and Tony and Philip and me and a piano player, Lamar Hill, who played in Frosty Morn that Michael Coleman had with Doc Watson. Lamar, we became kind of a rhythm section and started playing on people's demos. Roger Cook and Richard Lee and John had some songs. So we started doing that with John. And his deal with Elektra had run out. And Al was still looking for another big paying deal in record label. But Steve Goodman, who was really John's best friend, had cancer. And he knew he'd lost his deal too. His deal had run out. And he knew he didn't have all the time in the world to wait for another big record deal. And he got the idea for a label, Red Pajamas. Because Steve had a beautiful sense of humor about his illness, and just, I'm in red pajamas all the time, and that's the name of my label. So that's how that started. So meanwhile, John, we've been doing some demos with John, and we got paid demo scale, and he put me in charge sort of that kind of element of get the time cards and send to his accountant the paperwork, and his accountant was sure we were ripping him off and wasn't sending checks very promptly. And I had to deal with this and with Al Bonetta. I said, he lied, he said he sent the money, and when the money came 3 weeks later, the postmark wasn't 3 weeks ago. And he also had a habit of putting the American flag stamp on upside down, a symbol of distress, and he was using old glassine envelopes. Weird guy. And Al says, and I said, if I were you, I wouldn't have this guy. And he works in a room with no windows. I said, well, get him a goddamned office with some windows. I was really fed up. And we started getting our checks. And so at any rate, and then I'm riding with John one day. He said, I think I'm going to start a record label. I said, really? He said, what are you going to call it? He said, oh boy. I said, what are you going to call it? Oh boy. And so he said, asked me if I'd help him pull the tapes together. That's how Aimless Love started. That was, oh boy. But before we did that, he said, let's make a Christmas single. It was summertime. So I guess it was the summer of 80, I suppose. I saw Mama Kissing Santa Claus and Silver Bells. And we did things at 2 or 3 different studios, and I don't exactly know why we weren't using Cowboys. I don't remember why, but there was place down on Music Row we used for a couple of things, and place out in where area code 615 Wayne Moss had that Stack knew. We went out there one day. At any rate, we pieced those 2 songs together and put it out on red vinyl. It's Oh Boy 1, OB1. And with a picture of John on Santa's knee and Rachel on Santa's knee. And that's how we got started. And Aimless Love was basically really demo tapes that I might have spruced them up a little bit, but not much, and pretty much the way they happened. But it's got some beautiful songs on it. Yeah. Only Love is one of my favorites.
There's a video of you and John sitting at the kitchen table.
Yeah.
And what was that video?
Mike Leonard was a guy, I think he was a public television guy from Chicago. And he came down, he was a big fan of John's, and he just hung around. And he got some great footage in Cowboy's office and at John's kitchen table. That's surfaced in the last year or so, it seems. I don't know where it came from, but people started calling me up. And the first time I watched one of them was in the kitchen, and I wasn't in the picture. It was just John and Rachel. I think they were singing Ballad of a Teenage Queen or something. But then I saw my sneaker. I've been wearing these Stan Smiths since 1973.
What kind are they?
Stan Smiths, Adidas. Stan Smith was a tennis player of some sort. And so I recognized my shoe. And then finally he panned back and I got my hair in the back. You know, I knew it was me.
Okay. Can you tell folks about the Gerst House?
Well, yeah. John, very often, and we'd like to, there was a wonderful German restaurant in East Nashville, the Gerst House. And they had good Gerst beer in big, what the fish bowls kind of thing, big goblets, and good pig's knuckles and stuff like that, really good, bratwurst. And once in a while we would go over there, and we were working on, the first album came out, Aimless Love, and you know, we knew we were in business, sort of. And then John kept going. He was writing a lot of songs at the time, and he was in a really good place. This time we know we're making a record this time, you know, but it didn't make any difference really. But we did a few things, consciously made some decisions, you know, like we added Alan O'Brien and Stuart Duncan from the Nashville Bluegrass Band, which had become my favorite bluegrass band at the time, the Nashville Bluegrass Band, and to give it a little bluegrassy flavor to John's music, because it was in there. He's definitely got that Kentucky thing in him. It's definitely in there all the way, and so it made perfect sense to have this kind of addition. So we were working on that album. He and his mother were very close, and they both liked aphorisms and things, and like Crazy as a Loon, and you know, there's a million of them. But he was thinking of an album. We put the album together, sort of. We had a bunch of songs that we had done, and he liked lists, making lists, and so did Cowboy. He did like lists, and he had a list of names, possible names of this album, and he ran it by his mother. And she liked German afternoons. And I didn't have any idea what that had to do with this album, but it wasn't my role to question John. And we spent a lot of time with McGuire getting a cover picture. We went out on a hillside with a refrigerator, empty refrigerator with a light in it, and this is the cover picture. I don't know what that means either. John's sitting there looking into this empty refrigerator while the sun is setting behind him on a hill. At any rate, but he settled on German afternoons. So we were over there one afternoon, and we spent there about 3 hours in there, I'd say. And this guy named Ted Walker had these full moon bluegrass parties out at his place, and they were getting too busy. And he just happened, he was a lawyer in Nashville, and he came into the Gerst House after his hard days lawyering, and he ran into us. So we were all sitting in there going over. I said, well, you got to charge money, Ted, because that'll keep the riffraff out, and let us in for free and charge everybody else. Well, that just bought him a new driveway. I mean, it didn't keep anybody out, unfortunately. But at any rate, we were in there for all afternoon, and we came out. And I said, I guess that's what a German afternoon is. And John said, yeah, I suppose it could be. Something like that. At any rate, so we're trying to, I think it was before we got that picture of the refrigerator on the hill in the sunset, we were together, and John said, McGuire wanted some shots, and we re-recorded Paradise and with the Nashville Bluegrass guys, and it really came out great. And John said, why don't we go up to Central City? And been up there a couple of times. The Everly Brothers had started having their annual reunion up there. It was really great. And, you know, Central City is one of those musical hotspots in America, like Lubbock, Texas. They don't look like anything when you go there. There isn't anything there, really. But Merle Travis comes from there. Ike Everly comes from there. Bill Monroe comes from just over the hill. The Prine family came from there. It's one of those places. And so I'd been up there a couple times. Lake Malone is a nice lake there. You can rent a pontoon boat and go out there with some beers and whatnot. And John's, the family, they started having their family reunion there at Labor Day up at Lake Malone. So I'd been there, but I hadn't, just for that really, and for the Everly Brothers thing. And so there was a motel there, the Rambling Rose Hotel, and we got into the Rambling Rose, and McGuire was wanting some pictures up at Paradise, you know. So about 1 a.m, John says, we'd had some vodkas, you know, ginger ales, whatever, drink. He says, you fellas want to go see Paradise? You know, yes. No. And so we'd driven up there in this I think it was a 49 Ford coupe that he totally restored, red coupe, 2-door coupe. And so we get it, and it's 1 a.m. We're driving along this chain link fence in the dark, you know, and John's saying on the other side of that fence, there's remains of the strip mine, you know. They covered up with a few trees and kind of tried to cover plant grass on it. But anyway, and then the sky is really getting bright with a light from this, and we come around a bend as Paradise Power Plant. It's a coal power plant, big mountains of coal and it was wintertime, and we're driving. We go past all these no admittance, unauthorized people, stay out, blah, blah, blah. And this dirt road or path or whatever it was rutted from vehicles, but frozen ruts. So we're bouncing down, and we're headed to the Green River, where Paradise lay. And we stop. We get out. McGuire's taking pictures. Very surreal. And we hear sirens and see this Suburban heading our way, a big Suburban vehicle. And so McGuire's got his pictures, and we get back in the car, and we just roll up to them. He rolls his window down, says, I was just showing these fellas from Nashville where things used to be, and rolled his window up, and off we go. And those guys, they probably, I don't know what they thought. I really don't. A bit of a Twilight Zone material there. And later on, not that particular trip, but not too long after that, I was up there with John and his mother, and we drove around. And she really told me the story, how they came, and these were Paradise was a little village on the river, and they're shotgun houses, 3 rooms in a row. What you call a shotgun. You could shoot a shotgun right through the house. And wood frame, very simple houses, nothing fancy at all. They would come, and the oldest people in the town offer them $5,000. And the younger people didn't feel that it was their role to say these people they couldn't take it. So they just pick them off like that. So the younger people moved, went to Chicago or to Gary, Indiana, or wherever they went, somewhere else. And driving around with her, that was very emotional, She wasn't crying in her beer, but it was very matter of fact. It's the way it happened. And the world's largest shovel eventually dug its own hole and they couldn't get it out. So it's down there. And every year people go up there, I think on John's birthday or something, and sing Paradise over the grave of the world's largest shovel.
It's one of the great environmental songs ever written, but it doesn't get treated that way because it's such a subtle, beautiful song.
Yeah, and I think that's the secret of John's success, is the way he can write, and did write, about all kinds of things by just telling the story and letting it happen and not telling you what to think about it. But there's only pretty much one way to think about it. He did say they wrote it all down as the progress of man. That's as close as he comes to saying something. And of course, the Peabody it started getting played on the radio, and they tried to take it off the radio. And they said, "Oh, Mr. Prine makes recordings that are made out of petroleum, and so nobody's clean here, their excuse, But and you think of so many of John's songs, and they all have a chorus. Most of them have some kind of a chorus that you can sing, like Sam Stone, That gets that song into you, and it stays there. That's a very, very, that's just masterful. But it's the way he was. It wasn't, I don't think he was thinking I'm a master here of whatever. That's the way he wrote and the way he thought. And very often when you were with John, he would be humming, just humming tunes. You don't know what they were necessarily. And I found myself doing this in the last year or two. I find myself humming something, and it might be something I know and might not. He did that all the time. He had something going on in his head all the time. And those early songs he wrote when he was a mailman. And my mailman up here in Vermont was a fan of his, older guy, Bob Nutting. John was going to play up in Burlington. So I said, I'll take you up there. We did. And after the show, John and Bob Nutting sat and talked about delivering the mail for about half an hour. And Bob is doing a rural route, and he liked to talk to you. If you were out in the garden or on the porch or something, he'd expect you to come over to the car and have a little chat. And John was in high-rise buildings, most of them, a lot of it, not houses so much. And hello in there, a lot of those apartments had a mail slot. And he knew there was some person in there, and he would just lift it up and say, hello in there.
Did he tell you this?
Yeah. Hello in there. The mailman. Sometimes it's old people, that's their only contact with anybody all day long. There was this project, do a tribute album to Nancy Griffith. Well, she was still alive. And I was in on the thing when it started, really, but I didn't want to run it. I said, I'll contribute to this, but I'm not going to run it. I'm done doing that kind of stuff. And Ken Levitan was involved, and his assistant, Kathy Whitley, who was a wonderful person. And any rate, I asked Iris if she would be interested in doing a song, and she said she would. And I asked John, he said he would. And eventually I asked Lyle Lovett, and he did too. So Iris came, and we hadn't done anything for a while, and we went over. I wanted to do it at Cowboys because Cousin Bob now had it, and it was up and running, and that's where I recorded Iris and John and Nancy. And so Iris came and wound up. We did Banks at the Punch Train, and she had other songs that she wanted to record. So it wound up recording a good part of what has been her last album, her most recent. And so then John, we got to, he wanted to do Love at the Five and Dime with Kelsey Walden, who's on Oh Boy. And we found a time in December that he could do it. So he came in and with his guys, Jason and Dave, and so we just did it very quickly, Fats Kaplan, and it came out really nice. So it was December, mid-December, and 2019. So the next, I mixed it a couple of times, and I wanted to go play it for John. So it was like a Sunday. He was over at his house with Jody watching a football game. And I said, I got to mix and I Love at the Five and Dime, and I'll just leave it with you if you want to hear it. Fine, good. And that's the last time I saw him. And I was thinking, Christmas is coming and you're supposed to call your sick friends. So I called Nancy, who was sick. And she answered the phone. I said, I'm in town. I'd like to come over. He said, okay. So I went over to her house. It was still morning, but she had a beer in her hand, but she wasn't drunk or anything. And so I said, well, the reason I'm here is that I just recorded Love at the Five and Dime yesterday with John and this singer from Kentucky named Kelsey Walden. I said, would you like to hear it? She said, yeah. So I played it for her. And that's the last time I saw her.
How did you hear about John's passing?
Jody called me. I was under the, I was still, the COVID thing hadn't sunk in totally to me. And it just, and I knew he'd gone in, of course, he was a sitting duck. I mean, he had so many things wrong with him. And Fiona got it first. And so she wasn't in the hospital or anything. She was just sick. So she stayed upstairs and he stayed downstairs. Well, that doesn't work. And so at any rate, he got sick and he went into the hospital. But it was one of those deals where, he's feeling better today. Going to probably get through with this. And then Jody called me up. He said, no, it didn't happen. He was in there for 13 days, and Fiona could only see him the last day. It was brutal. One of those tubes in his throat. It was brutal.
And it was early, and we didn't know anything.
We didn't know anything. No, we knew nothing. So it was just rough, very rough. I guess maybe it was more than a year after he passed. we used to go to fishing up at White River in Arkansas, Mountain View. His brother Dave has started taking John up there when he was in high school, and there was a great old-time music scene up there. Jimmy Driftwood was from there, Glenn Orlin, a cowboy singer. Grandpa Jones had a place up there. And the White River's stocked with trout, and this great place, Jack's Fishing Resort, which back then was cabins, little cabins you could rent on the river, go fishing. So John had been going there for a long time. And so we started going over there, and usually around Memorial Day, and a bunch of us. And the place, the first time I went, it was still individual cabins, kind of log cabins, and had a porch, and you could sit on the porch and play and whatnot. And then they got flooded, and that got pretty well wiped out, and they rebuilt as a motel. But the motel had a continuous porch, screened-in porch, the length of how many units? I don't know how many units. And each unit was a kitchenette, kind of a setup with a stove and a refrigerator and everything. And so we would get half a dozen units in a row, and you could walk from one to the other on the porch. And then John would be making his Velveeta with jalapenos in it. And John Earl, who was a great pal of all of us, would fry up chicken. We didn't eat much fish. They didn't seem to like the fish. I would have been, I don't know. But at any rate, when we would go, Roger Cook was also part of this, a bunch of people. Dave, his brother Dave, Keith Sykes. Yeah, it was just a good group of people, and we always just had a great time. And we would always do a thing they had a catfish restaurant there, and after it closed one night, every time we were there, we would all go in there and kind of entertain the local people. And some of the local people sang, gospel stuff and whatever. And it was just terrific. We just always had such a wonderful time. And so after John passed, we decided we'd bring some of his ashes over there. And Keith Sykes, Roger, Sean Camp, myself, and so local people. We did the same thing. We did do some fishing, but the river was pretty high. It wasn't very conducive to that. But these two local guys, whose names escape me now, really good guys, and they took us up the river because you really needed somebody who knew what they were doing because the river was running pretty strong. And there was a place on the left, a falls, and very often when we were there, it would be almost dry. But this time it was just very beautiful falls there. And you'd go in through a little inlet, sort of, and there's a little bit of a lagoon in there. And so we went in there and just stayed there for a while, thinking about John and not doing too much talking. And one of the guy's wives had supplied us with roses. And so we got back out on the river. We still had the ashes. And while we were kind of close in, where we weren't going to get swept away too bad, each of us took a turn and put the ashes in the river and said something or not, depending on how we felt, and put a rose in there. And then we just drifted down back with no motors, just drifted back with those roses following us. And it was just really good. And then we went back and had quite a bit to drink and sang a whole lot of songs.
When I started doing this on YouTube, you say something about John Prine, the nicest people in the world showed up.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable what night and day it was. Or I don't think there's a single asshole who likes John Prine.
That's right. Jack Clement is like that too. Jack did not, he attracted gifted, generous people, not full of jealousy and greed and other things, negative thoughts. And John was the same. He did not attract people like that to him. And I feel that I've been really blessed by my association with Jack and with John, and in that way, because all of the people that I've met have been the musicians, the songwriters, the just regular people. They're just really nice people, and they're all very, very different and very much themselves. They're not cookie-cutter people. They have a wide range of political and social opinions about this, that, and the other thing in life, but they're very giving. They're not takers. They're givers, and they put their music out there. They put their songs out there. They put their talent out there for other people's benefit. And I think that's just makes for a really good life. You know, you can look around you and you see people that you love and they love you, and you get a lot of work done. And you send that feeling out into the world, and the world really needs it. And I think I'm proud of being part of that kind of a community. It means a lot to me, and people come up to me and just say thank you, you know. So yeah, those people, John and Cowboy in particular, they really had it that way.